Welcome everyone to the ADHD podcast. Today we are speaking to Tara Fortier from the United States of America, and I am very excited to introduce her to you. Tara is a veteran BCBA. That stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. She has been working in the field of applied behavior analysis, ABA, since 1998. She was lucky enough to be introduced to ABA at the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, starting as a direct care staff and working her way up to supervising her own clients with the oversight of some of the most prestigious behavior analysts in the field. After 3 years of learning from the best and knowing that she wanted to pursue ABA as a profession, she moved to Tampa, Florida, to obtain her Master's of Arts degree in Applied Behavior Analysis from the University of South Florida. Again, having had the opportunity to work with many well-respected behavior analysts. Tara says, one could say, I have a very good ABA pedigree. Since receiving her BCBA certification in 2003, she has had the opportunity to work with a very wide range of settings, including homes, clinics, residential settings, and schools. She now lives in Rhode Island with her husband, her 11-year-old son, and her 10-year-old daughter. Tara, it's wonderful to speak to you today.
It's great to be here, Alana. Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to be talking about ADHD. And my first question is, how does ABA fit into the picture? How can applied behavior analysis improve sustained attention, which is something that we know many children with ADHD struggle with?
So ABA can be effective in treating a variety of behaviors with a variety of different children and diagnoses. It's not just for autism. So it's really important to keep that in mind. One of the things that can be done to work on that sustained attention piece is really to really gradually start working on increasing the amount of time that a child can attend to a task. So you would probably want to start with, a really short amount of time where they're going to be successful, and then reinforce them for that. They should get rewarded and praised for being able to sustain their attention for a brief period of time. And then eventually you just gradually increase that. So you would have them work on a task for a slightly longer period of time, and then a slightly longer period of time. And so always rewarding them for being able to meet that milestone. And then go from there. I think one of the important things too is to take a look at the tasks that they're having trouble sustaining attention to. Sometimes I think we miss out on the fact that the things that they're having a hard time attending to might be just really difficult for them. And there might be a skill gap in there that we need to also address. So it's really important also to take a look at, what is this task? Is it only the specific task that they're having a hard time with, or is it all tasks? If it's all tasks, then that's really an issue with the sustained attention. If it's specific tasks, then it might be really important to take a look at, can they really do this on their own? Are they missing some skills? Do we need to support them in another way to make sure they have this skill? If it's really difficult for them, it's going to be a lot harder for them to sustain their attention to it. So I think sometimes we miss out on that piece a little bit, or we overlook the fact that the things that they're having a hard time with are things that are just challenging, and that can also help. So if we build up their skills in that area, they're going to be more likely to sustain their attention for longer periods of time.
I find it fascinating how you answered that question, and I think you've highlighted a very important issue, which is it truly sustained attention? Or are there actually other developmental skills that they're not fluent in that's making it look like they can't sustain their attention? Very interesting.
Exactly.
Now, can you explain short-term and long-term memory and how this impacts a child's academic success? How does ABA address this challenge for children with ADHD?
So the difference between short-term and long-term memory would be short-term, or sometimes we call this working memory, is the ability to hold on to something temporarily and be able to use that in that moment or within the short period of time, versus something that's more long-term memory would be something that we've learned, that we've held on to, that we can then use way down the road or recall at a different time. So oftentimes children with ADHD and autism struggle with that working memory piece. So being able to take that information, hold on to it briefly, and then do something with it. So that is definitely something that we work on. It's also important to kind of look at what kind of information they're having trouble with. Some children are better with retaining and using visual information versus auditory information, or information that they hear. So it might be important to look at the difference, and if they are able to, sustain and hold on to visual information better than auditory information, then those are the kinds of things that you want to present to them, because that's a strength for them, versus, you wouldn't want to always give them that information auditorily and not in writing or in front of them, because then that's harder for them to hold on to. So those would be, some kind of proactive strategies that you would want to look at. But then also giving them strategies on how to hold on to that information. Giving kids ways to kind of like, if they're presented with something, then repeating it in their head or writing it down or making a little picture to help them remember what that is. Sometimes we can't always address the biological reasons why they're having a hard time holding on to information, but we can give them strategies to use to address those sorts of things.
I get excited when I listen to you because there are pearls of wisdom in that answer. I don't even want to unravel it because we're not going to get enough time.
But I could talk about it for days.
I think every child is an individual, which you've highlighted. Absolutely. And what I also summarize from what you've said is there's always something we can do. There's always a strategy to teach that child so that they can improve on their memory. Now, how can ABA help a child with self-control?
So that is a great question. I think, it's important to look at the age of the child. I think sometimes we have expectations of younger children that often don't have a lot of self-control, and it's because they're young and they just haven't really developed that skill yet. But there's also, as kids get older, then we have that expectation that they're going to be able to do that a little bit better. So, oftentimes I think, people get upset about a little 4 or 5-year-old running around not being able to control their behavior and their bodies, but they're 4, they're 5. That's a pretty normal behavior for a child that age. So that's always important to keep that in mind, of what our expectations are for that child based on their age and, kind of their situation. But, if you've got an older child who's really having a hard time kind of sitting or, maintaining their, their body being still and things like that, then, we have to think about ways that we can give that to them in a more appropriate way. So being able to control their bodies or access that physical movement at appropriate times. So one of the ways we can do that, and this kind of leads into one of the other things that I think we were going to talk about, was just use like those sensory seeking strategies that we often talk about with ADHD, that a lot of times children will be kind of prescribed what we call like a sensory diet. So they, here's all these things that they can access, and they can bounce on the yoga ball, and they can go in the swing, and they can do all these things with their bodies because they seek that out and they like it and they enjoy it, and it calms them or makes them feel good in some way. And one of the things that I've run into over the years is that when we use those sort of strategies, we start to see a kid get antsy and they're wiggling in their seat and they're having a hard time paying attention. Then we're like, oh, do you want to go bounce on the yoga ball? Do you want to go in the swing? Do you want to go do these things? And those things get offered once they start those more inappropriate behaviors in the classroom, or, if they're supposed to be paying attention and they're not. So what you run into there is you might be teaching them, this is how I get access to these things, by starting to get wiggly and starting to be off task and do other things. So the way I like to approach that is giving them those things on a schedule or on like a time-based situation where, like, okay, when you come in the morning, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go swing on the swing for a little while, and we're going to bounce on the ball. We're going to get all of that sensory input. then we're going to go to class and we're going to sit down and we're going to do our work. And so they're getting those things on a schedule rather than based on their behavior. So I think they can be really effective, but it's important to think about the timing of when we give them those things.
I think that's excellent advice. Now, how can we help a child with ADHD build successful relationships?
I think probably looking at what their interests are, especially with, relationship to peers. I think sometimes, kids struggle because their behaviors may look odd or kind of make other kids uncomfortable. And so I think it's important to look at what that child's interested are, what they can maintain for a good period of time, and try to incorporate those things into their peer interactions. Looking for the kids that are going to be a little more open to that and starting with those sort of relationships. I often tell when we're trying to work on some social things in the classroom with other children, I always advise people like, take a good look around, like choose wisely the kids that you're going to try to work on them having a relationship with. Look at the kids that want to help the teacher, that are, nice to their friends, that, make nice gestures towards other people. And those are the kids that you want to start with because they're going to be a little more understanding and they're going to be a little more willing to participate in something. Especially if they like to help the teacher, then they're going to view this as like a special job. And so those are the kind of kids that you want to work on those sort of things with first, to build up that success. And then you might want to expand out to kids that are, going to be a little more challenging for that child to interact with.
I think it's been a very interesting experience for me, having had to help my own young son learn the social skills he needed to be successful in social relationships. I couldn't believe how many social skills really he needed to know to secure and establish and maintain a friend. A lot of effort needs to go into that. The child really needs to have a strong social skill set to draw from in order to actually establish and maintain that friendship. And on another day, we can actually just do a whole hour on the social skills that children need and the different ages and what's expected. But a lot goes into it. I think the important message is that it can be taught. Those skills can absolutely be taught. Now, we often hear the teachers complain about their child with ADHD. They'll say, that their planning and organizational skills aren't at the same level as their peers. How can we help a child with ADHD improve on planning and organizing?
So I think it's really important to remember, especially in the classroom, that a child with ADHD might need some extra supports and strategies to keep them organized. So expecting them to figure it out on their own is kind of setting them up to be unsuccessful in that way. So some of the strategies that I've seen over the years be really effective are just really simple things like having little picture cues on their desk or having checklists of, if they need to take out, their things for math, then they have a little checklist of the things that they need. I need my math notebook. I need my math book. I need my ruler, whatever it is. And giving them that information that they can work off of to organize themselves a little bit better. Or even just a lot of times you see a kid with ADHD and their desk is a mess. There's stuff everywhere. And so giving them, putting little sticky notes or, little stickers on, this is where this goes and this is where this goes. And they're just little extra helpful cues to them to organize themselves and know how to start an activity or how to start an assignment. So sometimes it can be just as simple as those little things. And then the nice thing about those strategies is that fosters more independence. The last thing we want is for children to always be dependent on an adult to tell them exactly what to do or to repeat the instruction 3 times before they get started. And so the nice thing about those little environmental pieces is that takes the adult or the teacher or the other person out of it. And then they become responsible for doing it themselves, which is ideally what we want. So it's, using those little strategies and reminders really helps with giving them that independence of being able to organize it themselves. It's also really helpful to as adults, we often want to just create something and be like, here you go. But it's nice to involve the child in that too. So that, asking them, like, what do you think can help you? What can we do? Are you going to be okay with having all of these stickers on your desk? Or do you want something that, maybe your friends can't see, or it's something that you slip inside your desk? And so taking into account that child and what their feelings are on it is really important too. We don't want to set them up with something that's going to make them feel uncomfortable and make them feel like they stand out either. So, and then they're going to be more likely to use it if they've had some involvement in it. So those are some of the strategies I've used over the years to help a child kind of organize and get themselves together to accomplish a task, especially in a classroom setting.
I love what you said, because the whole program is actually geared around trying to help that child to become independent. You'll actually also always, I'm sure you've heard this from your parents, they'll say, my child can't do their homework independently. And just the planning and organizing, I think, would tie into as teaching them strategies so that when they are busy with their homework, they don't always have to rely on that adult, and they can get to a point where a certain amount of the homework they can do on their own. Now,
absolutely,
I'm sure you can tell us a lot about what teachers could do for that ADHD child in the classroom. But if you had to think of like the top 3 things a teacher should do to prioritize helping that child with ADHD, what would that be?
I think the first thing to think about is breaking down those tasks that they're giving them into more manageable pieces. I think, we oftentimes expect a child, like, give them a worksheet and they're going to do it from top to bottom and finish the whole thing. And that's where a child with ADHD might struggle. It doesn't mean that they don't know the information or that they haven't listened to what the teacher said and absorbed it. It's just that, what's difficult for them is being able to maintain concentrating on that task. So breaking it down into smaller pieces can often be helpful. Okay, I want you to do these first 3 math problems, and then, then that child can get up and stand up and walk around the room and then come back and do another 3 or whatever it is, so that you're making it more successful for them to be able to accomplish something small, then come back and do the rest. So even just visually changing up materials can help a lot too. Sometimes just looking at an entire task can be overwhelming for a child. And so I've, cut a piece of paper in half, and it just looks a little bit easier. And so, like, let's just do this first part and then we'll go back and do the other part later. So anything that you can kind of modify the assignment or the way it looks, or, to make it a little bit easier for them to finish and accomplish at least part of it, so that they can then take a little break or, do something else and then go back to it later. I find that, that can be a really helpful way to set assignments up in a classroom. I think sometimes teachers can, it's difficult because it's, something additional that they have to do for that child, but it's also important to understand that that child just needs a little extra support. It's just something a little bit different, and not all children need that, but this child does. And so, just being willing to make those little modifications, outside of that kind of one size fits all, way of presenting information and assignments, can really help that individual child.
I love what you've said, because I think teachers can sometimes think it's going to take something really big. But as you've highlighted, it can just be small modifications that can go such a long way in helping that child produce the results that we're looking for. Now, tell us about inclusive education and children with ADHD in America, because in South Africa, many children with ADHD are referred to remedial schools, special needs schools. The mainstream schools will say, I'm so sorry, we just don't cater for children with ADHD. What's it like in America?
This is really interesting to talk about, because it really is a very different setup and system. So I would say in the US education system, the first thing that we're going to look at is those little accommodations, those little strategies and things that we can put into place in that regular classroom with all of their peers to see if that helps them. So we're always going to kind of start there and, and assess, like, then we're going to collect data and we're going to look at that information and, like, is this helping? Is this child now making better progress? If they are, great, then that's what we need to do. And it doesn't need to be anything more complicated or involved. If the data is showing, okay, this isn't working, they need more than this, then we might look at kind of, something a little more supportive, but still within that school or still within that system. Most schools in the public setting are going to have a classroom that's a little more structured and has like a different teacher to student ratio. There may be less children. There may be additional supports in place. It's still within their school, but it's just a classroom that lends a little bit more support. So the students that are in there are going to be the ones that need a little bit of extra. So we think about that as a little bit more of a restrictive setting, but it's still within their home school and they're still around their peers and they're still able to participate in all of these other things that aren't, a struggle academically. And so again, we're going to go back to the table. We're going to look at the data. Is that working? Is that helping? Are they making adequate progress? And if not, then we might think about, okay, do they really need something more than this? But the goal and the overall strategy in the US education system is to educate the child in the least restrictive setting possible for them to be successful. So we're always going to try all of these things first and see where that is, right? We don't want to, we won't put them in a really restrictive setting if they don't need that level of support. So that's I think probably a big difference between the systems that we're talking about.
It's a huge difference. The South African education system is really just intolerant. And it's so interesting to hear what your yardstick is in America, the least restrictive setting. There are certain private schools in our country that do accommodate for what they call that bridging class that is still under the umbrella of the mainstream school. But I'd say the majority of children are kind of shipped off to remedial and special needs schools. And I think it's very interesting for the parents to hear you explain and tell us more about what it's looking like in America. Hopefully that's something that we can work towards. Now, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions around ADHD. Sometimes I hear parents say that I've been told my child will amount to nothing and I'm going to have to look after him and he won't be able to hold down a job because he's impulsive, he's hyperactive, he's inattentive. Is this true?
Obviously, it's going to depend on the individual child, but I think often, there is this idea that, a child with ADHD that really can't sit or can't, accomplish tasks. It doesn't mean that they don't have the ability, from a cognitive or an intelligence standpoint. They can learn, they can, absorb and retain information. They just have this extra challenge that gets in their way a lot of times. And so once you remove some of that challenge, you're probably going to find that they're able to really, make some faster progress and learn the things that the other kids are learning. So I think it's, it's one of those things that, with the right supports in place, they can definitely make progress. And it's not necessarily going to be this situation where, they're not ever going to be able to do anything productive or they're never going to be able to have a job or anything. That's certainly not true a lot of the time, but they just haven't received the right supports to support them in moving past
the words you used is very encouraging because you talk about removing challenges. And I think that's so motivating for parents to hear, because I think often parents think that these are my child's challenges, I must accept it, and there's nothing that can be done. And what I've enjoyed about learning about applied behavior analysis and how that can help is that ABA can go a very long way in helping the child to learn those skills that they need so that those challenges can actually change or be removed or be improved. Now, what can the parent of the child with ADHD do at home? We spoke about what the teacher could do at school, but the parent, what could they do at home to help their child be more successful?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of the answer to that is similar to what I was talking about in school. It would be a lot of the same sorts of things that like we talked about, of a child having trouble, getting their homework done. Or one of the things I hear a lot is, I can't get them to get ready for school in the morning. Like I walk away for 5 seconds and they're off doing something else, or they haven't done the things that they need to do. And so I think the strategies that you would need would be very similar to, kind of breaking tasks down, especially like, for example, the getting ready for school in the morning. If you just said to your child, okay, go get ready for school, there's so many tasks involved in that, right? They have to, brush their teeth, they have to change their clothes, they have to go downstairs, they have to eat breakfast, they have to do all of these things. And there's multiple opportunities to get off task. And so breaking those things down and giving those visual reminders. I love visual schedules for that reason, to just kind of visually show the child, okay, first thing you're going to do, brush your teeth. They go brush their teeth, then they go back, they check that off. Okay, that's done. What's the next thing? And giving them a guideline for what they need to accomplish. So the things that would be helpful in a classroom can also be really helpful at home as well. Same thing for homework, just giving them some time to, okay, let's talk about what you need to get this homework done. What are the materials you need? Where's your paper? Let's go get it, and then setting them up. And then, okay, great. You work for a couple of minutes. I'll be back. I'm going to check on you, and doing those regular check-ins, but you're giving them the opportunity to be independent for short periods of time. And you can translate that to any task that a child might do at home. So it's a lot of the same strategies that we already talked about, actually.
Tara, it's been so insightful to speak to you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It's my pleasure.